Welcome to my channel where we question everything. Today's topic is military affairs and are the Western and Ukrainian leaders and commanders really that dumb, or are we underestimating them? Today is November the 6th. Scott Ritter, the game changer, as I call him, has written an article for RT.com on November the 5th. And we discusses the recent media expose on the US effort to arm Ukraine. It was written by Joshua Jaffa and published on the New York website on October the 17th. And the title of this specific article was called Inside the US Effort to Arm Ukraine. I will leave a link to this article in this comment section. Now, Scott Ritter discussed this article and purpose of it, but I don't want to really talk about that. Scott Ritter then concludes the article as follows. I would like to quote, Jaffa's Inside the US Effort to Arm Ukraine is a clever piece of government-dictated stenography disguised as journalism and should be treated as such by all who read it, end quote. What I would rather like to do is I would like to rather talk about the contents of this article and discuss on how we see the Ukrainians and the Western military complex. I always believe there are two sides to any coins, and that's why I would like to discuss the other side, which this article has brought forward. The usual narrative of the pro-Russians or anti-Western commentators is that the Ukrainians and the Western powers are usually dumb and they do not know what they are doing. Now, I've always just disagreed with that because it's a one-sided view, and like I said, a coin has two sides. The narrative is usually that these guys have no experience and never fought a pure army. And therefore, the American commanders are basically, who train the Ukrainian forces, are basically, call it idiots. They don't know what they're doing, and they don't know how to fight against a peer type of army, because they've always fought people like with normal Kalashnikovs, and they were wearing sandals. And we're specifically talking here about the Middle Eastern wars. Now, again, Andrei Martynov is a great example, but I don't want to criticize him per se, but he's the most vocal. And if you watch every of his videos, then, well, you will quickly notice what I'm talking about. The point here is that having fight against weaker forces like the Middle East doesn't make you incompetent to fight against a bigger war. So what I would like you to do is to read this article and make up your own mind. It is very well written, and is actually sometimes, I would guess, better written than some of the pro-Russian punters have done. Makes a very good story, whether it's factual or fictional. However, it does present you with a narrative that shows you there's a different side to the pro-Russian narrative. If you read it, it sounds like they are not that dumb. The biggest mistake that anybody can really do is to underestimate your enemy or your opponent. And I believe that's being made by both sides of the Ukrainian and the Russian war. You can always look at the propaganda that is issued by the Western medias, and then we can compare it against the more enlightened commentators that are on the pro-Russian or anti-Western side. Well, I don't believe that all the people on both sides are stupid or incompetent. Yes, you do get idiots on both sides, but how powerful and plentiful are they? I mean, it can't be all of them. And they had to get to that position somehow, somewhere. So they have to have had shown some intelligence and skills in their respective jobs, if you want to call them. But yes, people make mistakes. And if you look at the Russian side in the special military operation at the beginning, the Russian generals did make mistakes. That is even confirmed by pro-Russian sources. And yes, the issue of Kiev is still a debatable point. The Western side say it was a mistake and a bad planning from the Russians, and the others, pro-Russian, say no, it was a fake attack. Well, you can make up your own mind, but what bothered me a little bit is that there was a so-called 14-mile long armored column that became stationary. And even if you wanted to do a fake attack on Kiev, you don't allow, or you don't, you ensure that this type of military column is never stationary or can be targeted. Yes, it was protected by helicopters. Yes, Ukrainians didn't attack it because they didn't have the capability. But then again, who knew? Were the Russian generals really that sure about that? So in my opinion, that was a very, very dangerous situation. Could have easily been exploited and could have resulted in significant losses for the Russians. Nothing was basically guaranteed. So yes, there is some truth that the Russians were unprepared. Even with the initial assessment or the initial tactics that they used during the in the initial the first couple of weeks, things didn't work out as the Russians wanted them to progress. But at the end of the day, they quickly adapted, changed the tactics, and we started to see a war of attrition and artillery fire, etc., and etc. And basically, we know what the story is. But again, that was not always conveyed by the pro-Russian punters. Well, like I said, the Russian command adapted and changed their tactics. Well, so did the Ukrainian commanders. And that's why we had the successes of the Ukrainian offenses in the Kharkiv regions. And yes, they were successful. One has to give credit due when it is due. They did occupy or recover a lot of ground. Yes, as stated, some of the cities were empty, but so did the Russians occupy huge swath of land, and the first weeks of the SMO, which were also not properly defended. And we can talk here about the Kherson region and the Zaporizhzhia area. The Russians had very little resistance countered very little resistance in that area. But I do have some criticism of this article, and basically that is what I'm going to discuss. Scott Ritters had pointed out in an interview, I believe it was with Peter Lavelle from Crosstalk, where he pointed out that the Russians and Putin act very patiently and responsibility until they are forced to react. And when they do react, the reaction is in huge steps or huge increments. And if you look back at the conflict that has happened for the last 9 months, you can see there was an initial phase, and then it changed to the second phase. We totally changed and became more aggressive. Then we had a third change, which was now the incorporation of the 4 provinces of oblasts or 2 republics, doesn't matter how you count, into Russia, and the call-up of the reserves. And I know nothing is much happening at this stage on the front. It is a little bit of skirmishes, if you want to call it. One has to ask yourself why. Well, I don't know how it goes, but as far as I know, or I've been told by many articles, it's supposed to be the rainy season. And when it becomes rainy, then the lands are soaked, become muddy. People can't really travel, or not people, the tanks and vehicles. So they're limited to roads, and that makes them vulnerable. And basically, there's a waiting game until the ground now freezes for the winter. And then everybody expects the next phase. Well, that might be true. And also, I believe that the Russians are waiting for the arrival of the 300,000 additional reserves that they recently have called up. What the Russians did do is they have started to fortify their defense lines because they are currently undermanned. As far as I know, and I mentioned in previous videos, the Ukrainians are supposed to have an army of about 700,000 men. And the amount of men available to the Russians currently is 200,000. Yes, they are, according to Putin, there are about 45,000 reservists that has already arrived to the front. So let's call it 250,000 soldiers on the Russian side. Now you can still see it's lopsided. The whole front still can't be properly defended. But if you look at the maps of the military summary, then you will find that there are about 4 concentration of forces. The way I understand it is that currently the Russian offense against Bakhmut has stalled as well, and that the Ukrainians have moved in a lot of additional units to protect Bakhmut, and they have withdrawn it from the Kharkiv region. But basically, everything has come to a standstill, and it is logical. So we don't hear much about the front. But I'm digressing. I wanted to come back to the original article, where I said that Scott Ritters said that when the Russians react, they react in large increments. And in this article that we are referring to, it is stated that the Western commanders have a very slow creeping forwards, like small increments, like first non-lethal weapons, then a little bit of defensive weapons, and bigger defensive weapons, and so forth. And now they believe that the lack of Russian response can be viewed as being weak, and that Putin doesn't want to commit themselves to a war with NATO, and now they might be planning in sending in American fighters and tanks and stuff like that. But I believe that would be a very huge mistake, and that is actually substantiated by Scott Ritter. What I'm actually afraid of is that they will push the Russians, who are patient, and then basically will just go a little bit too far. The Russians will feel they have to react, and then they will make a huge increase again, incremental step, and they will start destroying some of the NATO bases or personnel, where there will be physically NATO casualties. And then it becomes a game of now the ball is of to react is in the court of the Western nations. And then the next Western commanders and the world has to decide whether they want to commit and start World War III. So as you can see, this is a very dangerous situation if you underestimate your opponent. And it looks like that might be the idea that the Western commanders in the world will become emboldened by the patience of the Russians, and that will force them basically into a position that where there is no turning back. In any case, we can also see the reactions from the Russians. Why I'm saying it's incremental is that since there was some sabotage action in Russia itself, some in the border towns of Russia as well. The murder of that woman, can't remember her name. Well, these names are in any case difficult to remember. But I believe it mostly started with the attack on the Kerch, the Crimean Bridge. And then there was the attack on the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And after those two events, things changed dramatically. Before, Russia didn't attack any civilian structures. They allowed the importation of certain American or Western weapons. They basically were patient and allowed, in my opinion, way too much to be done. So the Western world until now has gotten away with so-called murder, if you want to call it. But after these two attacks, the Russians dialed up the pain dial, as they would pain dial, and started bombing the infrastructure of Ukraine and destroyed more than 30%, some people say 40% of the power grid or the power supplies. It had destroyed certain water connections, train services, etc. And now it seems that without this power, a lot of civilians in Ukraine will now start to suffer, especially since it's becoming winter. And well, this for me is a significant escalation. So, talking about the specific entries in the article, we can start off with the effectiveness of the HIMARS. Now, I know Scott Ritters said these are game changer weapons. That's why I call him a game changer. But I cannot agree with that. In the article, it's already stated that Ukraine will not receive unlimited ammunition for these systems because the American stocks are limited and the production rate of these missiles are slow. So replacing them is very difficult. Then they only have supplied, in any case, a limited amount of these HIMARS. And if you think that it's more than 1,000 kilometers, or still don't know, 1,000 miles, 1,000 kilometers long, how you gonna distribute them? Say 20 of them. I think that's what they're about delivered. And we know that there are about 6 or 7 of them having been destroyed by the Russians. So how are you going to distribute the remaining 7 years? America is going to send some more. I think they're going to send maybe 4 of them, but I'm not totally sure. But again, say we're sitting on 20. How are you going to distribute 20 of them over the whole contact line? So you're going to put one launcher, what, every 100 kilometers? Or are you going to do it? Or every 500? Well, 50 kilometers? Or are you going to group them to become more effective? Well, I don't know. That means they have to concentrate them. And when they become concentrated, then they are easier for the Russians to identify their location and then destroy them. Or as we have seen in the daily reports of the Russian Defense Ministry, that they are shooting down HIMARS projectiles out of the air. And okay, I can understand. I don't think they shoot down all projectiles, but they do probably shoot down the majority of them. And if these HIMARS are located in certain positions, then, well, the Russians can put their air defenses there, and then they become less effective. So, I know the Americans lie in this letter that they say all the HIMARS launches are still active. But that should show you at least something, that there are a lot of lies in this article itself. Because if you enter one lie, then who says you are not lying in other places as well? So whatever's in the article, take it with a huge pinch of salt. But not everything is there. And the way it is described and the way that they are communicating, again, doesn't sound like they are idiots. And then we talk about the effectiveness of the M777. And it's supposed to have had a huge influence. Again, the game changers. No game changers. Yes, there are 155 millimeter artillery pieces. The Russians have 152 millimeter, so just a 3 millimeter variants. But they are towed, and yes, the Russians ones are also towed. But Russia has a lot of self-propelled versions of these artillery pieces, which is a lot, makes a huge difference. Do these artillery pieces shoot further than the Russians? No. They usually have more or less the same range. I'm actually compiling a separate video on artillery pieces where I discuss the difference, not in detail, only in application, but I will probably release it this week as part of my series where I talk about weapons used in Ukraine. The only time when these systems do shoot longer distances is when they use the Excalibur round, and the estimated distance is about 40 kilometers, but that's a theoretical distance, or maybe done under test conditions. According to some reports, the maximum distance these shells have been fired by American forces was a record of 35 kilometers. Again, the Russians have similar ammunition. You get the normal shell, which is 25 to 30 kilometers. And then you have the base bleed version. Both forces use the same, which is a little bit like 35 kilometers. And then you have the rocket-assisted projectiles, of which the Excalibur is one of them, which can go to 40 kilometers. So as you can see, nothing special, nothing out of the range. It just provided an alternative. Just remember, during the Soviet, when the Soviet Union dissolved, a lot of weapons were stored in Ukraine. So the Ukrainians also had the 152 millimeter artillery pieces. So basically, it was same military artillery pieces between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Nothing special. But let's wait for the video that I'm compiling. Then the Stingers were mentioned, but yeah, Stingers were probably first generation with limited seeker head. So I'm not going to talk that. For me, that's not really a factor. I don't know if the Stingers are effective against UAVs, but definitely not against helicopters and fixed-wing aircrafts. And then we talked about the Javelins, and I found an article that says that a Ukrainian prisoner of war, he spoke on a video released by the Russian Minister of Defense. Yeah. Could have been propaganda. I'm not so totally sure, but I would like to quote him. The US military aid, to my mind, has been overhyped because the much touted AWVS anti-tank weapon system and grenade launchers, the Javelins and in-laws are very heavy promoted, fail to prove their worth in practice. They suffered setbacks with normally 1 out of 4 weapons firing and instances of duds or blasts 50 meters away from the target. So they were not that effective as one would think. Then one also, you can look it up a little bit. You can look at Russian tanks, the T-72 and the T-90. They have active defense systems, very similar to an air defense systems. The tank is not a tank anymore, which depends on its the thickness of its armor. They have certain systems, self-defense systems, that shoot out or create a cloud of particles where this anti-tank weapon has to travel through and basically destroys itself. So you can call it like an air defense system. Now, it's not easy to kill a tank unless the commander who controls this air defense is either asleep, not paying attention, or then what you can do is you can overload the system by firing in a certain pattern. You have to fire 2 or 3 javelins at the same time, so the defense system cannot do that. But unfortunately, that has to be done by properly trained anti-tank crews, which the Ukrainians don't really have. The best way actually for a tank to kill her is to use another tank. And in my one video where I talked about the T55, T62 versus the T62, the upgraded versions of the T55 tank has a capability of destroying a T72 by cannon fire. That's the right cannon, eh? Those are the cannon. I think that's the word. In any case, even Scott Ritter has, again, stated in a video, which I can't remember which one, that was some time back ago, that he saw a tank, a Russian tank that was shot by 5 javelins and still survived and was still operating and was still going ahead and firing. And then I found an article in Eurasian Times, which was published on the 18th of August, and they made a referral to a leaked document from the manufacturer of this javelin, Raytheon, and I would like to quote, unfortunately a bit long. The Javelin anti-tank guided missiles, 5,000 of which have been supplied to Ukraine by the United States to fight Russia, have a poor hit-to-miss ratio, range and technical malfunctions, as per internal documents from its manufacturer, Raytheon. That's an internal document. It's not propaganda. It's an internal document. The document also contains survey results from US soldiers who are unclear about the system's performance characteristics and observe repeated snags and poor maintainability. Then they show shots about this. That means test data that the manufacturer has executed. The one chart shows the actual performing range of the Javelin with an 8.4 kilogram missile at 2,500 meters, half of the advertised 5,000 meter distance. So it doesn't do specs. The graph relevant to the Javelin is called Just Right, and also records observed ranges of other systems like the TOW missile, 84 rocket launchers, and heavy mortars. So it does a comparison. It's not only single. Then another set of graphs compared the Javelin hit ratio to the TOW missiles, where the former hit only 3 targets out of 8. Talking about the Javelin. And the latter hit 2 out of 14. So the TOW is even worse than the Javelin. So these things are not that accurately to hit their targets. I mean, one would think that these guys are hit, fire a missile, it's a fire and forget missile, and it allows a soldier to move to a different position and the rocket goes and kills the tank. No. Doesn't work like that. Only 3 out of 8 shots doesn't make it to the target. Now that's a stationary target. What if the Russian tank sees it and then either quickly reverse or change position or throw smoke or whatever? Then how does the Javelin then handle? Now, unfortunately, it says also, however, the conditions of these engagements, whether in exercises, combat scenarios, weather conditions, test conditions, or on moving or stationary targets are unknown. Now, if I had to do these targets, this is what I presented. I'm telling you, still, this ideal test condition. Perfect weather conditions, stationary tank, showing your client what's happening, poof. You're not going to do the most difficult decision, which is in bad weather and moving targets and under battlefield conditions. Well, that's the end of the quote. So I was just talking a little bit about what they said, and that's why I wanted to point it out. Not everything that they say is the truth in that article. So you cannot, but it was nicely written. And one has to think about this. Why? Well, in all wars, there is a necessity of the enemy to be demonized and degraded to a subhuman level. No man can kill another man, normal man, like me and you, unless he's either a criminal who has done it before or he's a psychopath. We can all be bravado and talk about all these movies that we saw, and if there's an intruder, we might try to shoot him, but trust me, pulling that trigger is not easy. And if you have to do it, then you're going to have nightmare probably for the rest of your life. So it's not a natural thing for any man to kill another. And therefore, soldiers have to be conditioned. And that is why they are subjected to propaganda and psychops. Now, when I was in the army, we were propagandized. Make no mistake about that. So here in South Africa, we have to do 2 years compulsory military service. It's all gone now, since in the old regime, say before 1990, we had to do military service. And well, you had a choice. You can go directly after school, you can go to the army, or you can go first study, get a diploma or a degree, and then go to the army. Now, I first did my degree, and then I went to the army, so I was a little bit older. Together with a lot of other people that also studied were also older. Now, the propaganda always worked, the psychops worked perfectly on the 18-year-olds. For us, being a little bit older, being a little bit more wiser, we could see the technique. So, yes, we were propagandized a little bit, not as much as the military properly wanted. Well, the same thing happened well, if you look at the American wars, like in Vietnam and so on. I mean, Americans called the Vietnamese gooks and I don't know what everything else and so on. And when they fought in the Middle East, they didn't consider those people as human beings, and sometimes they would shoot the innocent civilians. And I know they had some names before for them as well, which I can't now remember. But they were classified as subhumans. And that's why they did what they did. You can even see that when psychops techniques are like in sports and when you have fan clubs and you have soccer hooligans. All right, in this case, you want to sell memorabilia, and you want to sell soccer shirts, and you want to sell other merchandise, and you want to get excited that the teams go work up themselves and go watch the games, and my team is better than your team. It's all those stupid psychops, but it's only a sport. And the problem is that I see the same thing happening in the pro-Russian punters or commentators and the anti-West. They are currently referring to the Western leaders and commanders as being stupid, ill-equipped to fight a war like that. They have no experience in that. But then on the other side, we also know that no war is the same thing. So even with the best preparation, when the war starts, tactics change, weapons have changed, and whatever you have to learn, you have to adapt to the new situation. Like I said, the Russians also made mistakes, and they had to adapt. So did the Ukrainian commanders. They changed their methods and adapted. Basically what's happening. So what I was hoping is that in future, which I all believe you are pro-Russians and anti-West, or more enlightened and know the truth, that you will look with and discuss the matter with more respect towards the enemy or the opposition, and change this narrative. Again, yes, you get idiots on both sides, but most of them are not idiots. They are clever, and they know a lot more than we do. They have also access to a lot of information that we don't have. So they have a reason why they make the decisions as they are making. There's a reason for that we don't usually know. So one has to be careful. on underestimating your enemy or your opposition or your opponent. Well, that's my story for today. Please subscribe to the channel, spread the words, tell your friends. Let's grow the channel so that we can do more. And until next time, cheers.